Okay, so the Lazy Daisy center, which we're going to use on our January cutie and again on the June design. I am going to use my 200mm by 200mm or 8x8 square hoop for this, or if you have a 6x10, that will fit. And if you are going to do the background quilting, you'll need at least a 6x10. If you're not going to do the background quilting, it will fit in a 5x7 hoop. I'm going to select my Lazy Daisy design first. So that that goes in as my number 1. Make sure that's in the center, and then I will go to my quilting, and I want to make sure I'm in the January, and then you select the 6x10 center snowman. Move that to the center, and then that will be my number 2 design because I put that on second. So that's going to matter here in just a minute. And now I'll just attach my hoop. So now this series, 1-1 through 1-11, that's going to be the placing, that's going to be the actual Lazy Daisy design. So I'm not actually going to start with that. I'm going to start with 2-1 because I need to start with the way that I'm doing it, because I can combine the designs on my machine. Is I'm going to start with placing the batting tack down, the batting placement line, then the batting tack down line, the background placement line, the background tack down line, and then I won't do the quilting. I will go back to 1-1 and do the Lazy Daisy, and then once that is stitched out, then I will go to 2-5 and do the actual quilting. Okay, so we'll start with 2-1. Okay, so first off, the batting placement line. Okay, so then I'll grab my batting, and I've cut my batting approximately 7.5 by 7.5, same as the background, so that's plenty big enough to cover that placement line, and then we'll do the batting tack down line. So now I'm going to take that off of my hoop and trim my batting close to that stitch line. Okay, so that's trimmed, and now we will stitch the background placement line. Okay, now you can simply lay down your mint colored fabric or whatever color you're using as your background for the Lazy Daisy and stitch the background tack down line. Okay, now don't go on to step number 5. The next step that the machine wants to do is going to be the quilting, but we want that on top of our Lazy Daisy. So I'm going to go just like I showed you before, and I'm going to go up to design number 1, 1-1. And that's going to be the start of our Lazy Daisy design. So step number 1 is going to be the piecing template. Okay, so there's our template, and now for fabric number 1, piece number 1, if you're following along with the fabrics that Kimberbell has assigned, it's this white with the blue polka dots. So just lay that down over this petal that's closest to you, closest to the bottom of the hoop, and make sure you're covering that entire outline, and then stitch down. There's just a 1 stitch line that it's going to do here. Okay, so then you just want to trim on the topmost side of that stitch line that it just did. Oh, my machine's got a nice trim position that I can move it to, so that I can trim right there, or if I need to take it off the hoop, that's fine. And then without doing another stitch, we're going to take our middle piece of fabric, which is the snowflake one, and we're going to lay that down right side down on the bottom side of that stitch line closest to you, because it's going to end up getting flipped over, and just center it on that line so that we know it's going to cover that entire middle section, middle daisy piece. and then stitch the next line. Okay, so for this next part, for the flipping it, I'm gonna get out my handy dandy Clover mini iron, and it gets really hot. I've got it on medium right now, which is going to be plenty. The high heat setting is very, very hot. And I have melted a couple of things before I realized how hot it got. So now flip that right side out and press it, or finger press it, or if you need to, then take your hoop off your machine. If you want to use a regular iron, use an ironing board. Just make sure you keep it in the hoop so that you can put it back on and keep going. And then we're going to stitch out the next line once that's nice and pressed. Now make sure as you're going that your pieces on the piecing template are all covered up how they're supposed to be once you flip those fabrics right side out, right side up. And then I'm just going to move my machine here so that I can trim on the left-hand side of that line, trim away the extra snowflake fabric. And then we will lay down our third piece of fabric, which is this geometric pattern. And just center that on the line that we just stitched, and then stitch the next line. Okay, so now once again, we're going to flip the fabric right side up. Press that as you desire. And then we're going to stitch the petals tack down line. So the line's going to go along here, making that petal shape. And I'm actually going to add a couple pieces of tape along here because mine were lifting up sometimes when it was coming back to do the stitching line the second time. So I'm going to grab my Kimberbell paper tape and just tape those down. And then we will stitch the petals outline. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take it off the machine so that I can properly trim. So we're going to trim above that stitch line to get our petals outline, and we're going to trim on the inside curve of this line that has just stitched. So make sure you trim on this side of the line, the bottom or the left side of this line on the inside curve, and then on the outside of these petals. Okay, so there it is all trimmed up. Then we're going to put it back on the machine and we will stitch out the decorative outline that goes around these petals. Okay, so after the petals decorative outline, the next stitch is a placement line for our little square of mint fabric that's going to go in the center of our lazy daisy. Okay, so then just place your piece of mint fabric over top of that placement line and then stitch the tack down line. Okay, so once that piece of fabric's in place, now make sure you know which side you're cutting before you start cutting. You're going to cut along the outside of the curve this time. We're going to cut the excess away on that outside so that it looks like that. Leave it just like that, and then the next stitch is going to be the quarter circle decorative outline along here. Now your machine is going to go to step number 11 after it does this decorative outline on the quarter circle in the center there. But that's just a placement stitch. We're not actually going to run that stitch. So now because I'm doing the background quilting all in one on mine, now I'm going to go back to my screen here and select 2.5, which is my background quilting, the swirls and the little snowman. So I'm going to change my thread to my bright white and then I will stitch out the background quilting over top of our Lazy Daisy. Okay, so now my Lazy Daisy center is all done. That's what it looks like with the background quilting on. Now, if you can't combine your designs, but you do want to do the background quilting, you're going to do your, well, you can hoop both your stabilizer and your background fabric if you've cut it large enough. Or what I would do if I was going to do it like that is I would hoop just my light mesh cutaway stabilizer, and then I would use 505 spray, or I would just tape down the background fabric, and then you're going to stitch out your piecing template and do the steps for your Lazy Daisy. And then you're going to unhoop it, and you can cut away the excess stabilizer, and then what you're going to do is you're going to put a new piece of stabilizer in your hoop, and then you're going to do the other steps. You're going to do the batting placement line, batting, place your batting, do the batting tack down line, and then you're going to do the background placement line, and then you're going to put this Lazy Daisy design down as your background, and then do the background tack down line, and then you're quilting. So that's one option if you're not able to combine designs, if you don't have the software and your machine can't do it right in your machine. So now what you're going to do is you're going to, using whatever method you've chosen, you're going to do 3 more of these so that you have 4 centers, and then I will show you how to trim them and how to put them all together to make the center of your cutie. Okay, so now we've got to cut our center squares. So you're going to start by positioning it like this so that you can measure 1/4 inch from the end of the decorative petal stitching. And that's going to be about where that tack down line is. So I'm just going to go 1/4 inch right from the end of the decorative stitching so we can match up the decorative stitching when we sew them all together. And then we'll turn it this way because we're going to do the same thing here. Find the end of your decorative stitching right there and line it up 1/4 inch from that. And we'll line it up with our other line that we just cut. And then what we're going to do is we're going to measure 5.5 inches from the edge that we've already cut. And then one more cut, 5.5 again. Get that as square as possible. And there's 1 out of 4 of our little center squares. Do that on all your other squares, and then we will sew them together. Okay, now I'm going to do my snowman design. So I've already got my background quilting on my big hoop, my 8x14 hoop. Now I'm going to add the snowman because I can combine multiple files right on my machine. But he needs to be rotated a couple of times. And now you're going to see there are these 2 grayish lines going diagonally, and you want to line those up with the red outline of the background quilting. So that outer line, you want to line those small diagonal lines up with. And then you'll know that your snowman's in the right place. Oh, I'm just going to center it, and then I can just move him left. So if you have software, you can also do this on your computer for better accuracy. I don't have any software. I just line them up as best I can using the tiny screen on my machine. Don't worry about the green exterior line you see going around the snowman. If you're combining background quilting with the snowman, you'll be skipping that step anyway. If you can't combine them using your machine or software, you'll need to do 2 separate hoopings and you won't be skipping any of the steps, but we have them combined. So we're going to skip steps 1 and 2 of the snowman design, which you will see once we get finished with the background quilting. So let's get started. Okay, so first the placement line for our batting. Place your batting down and run the tack down line for your batting. Okay, so take that off your machine and trim the batting close to that stitch line. Okay, and now the placement line for the background fabric. Okay, and place your background fabric. Make sure it's right side up. Sometimes these whites, it's hard to tell. And tack down line for the background fabric. And then switch to whatever color you want to use for your background quilting and quilt the background quilting. Okay, so that's it for the background quilting block by block portion of that block. Now, if you've combined both of if you've combined the background quilting and the snowman in software or right on your machine, you're going to skip steps 1 and 2. So let's see. So 2-1 and 2-2. You're going to skip and go right to 2-3. And that will be the placement line for our glitter. If you didn't combine them, then you would have to take this out of the hoop, put in new stabilizer, and stitch step 1, which is the placement template. And then I'll show you where to line up the corners of your fabric. And you would already have this cut. You'd have to cut this along this line and then line up your corner. And then step number 2 will be a basting tack down stitch that you're going to take out later. So you want to do that in a visible color. Now I'm going to skip right to step 3, which is the placement line for my glitter. Okay, so make sure you take off the clear covering from your heat transfer vinyl and place that down, covering up your placement line. Then you can take that off your machine and just trim your glitter as close to the stitching line as you can get it. And then that will be covered up with a satin stitch in a moment. Okay, so now's the time to also use a pressing cloth and press your glitter with a warm iron, which I usually don't do. I find that the stitches are enough. I don't need to also use my iron to do it. And then we're also going to switch to a red thread to do the placement line for the hat. Now you can place your little piece of red fabric that you've already cut over that placement line and stitch the tack down line. Okay, so now what we need to do is we're going to take this off our machine and trim around the red fabric of the hat. And then we will switch to white thread and do the satin outline of our snowman. Okay, so I'm going to give that a roll with my roller because that red left a bit of a mess on there. And then put that back on my machine. I've already switched to the white thread, so I'm going to stitch out the satin stitch. Okay, so that's what the satin stitching looks like. It leaves a spot there for the scarf. That's totally how it's supposed to be. And then you just leave your white thread on and stitch the snowflakes on the hat. Okay, so I'm switching to a medium gray for the top part of the skis, which is the next stitch. So put whatever color you want for the top half of the skis here and stitch away. Okay, so now the bottom part of the ski, I'm just going to use a much darker gray for that. So switch to whatever color you want to use for that, dark gray or black or brown or whatever your heart desires. And then stitch that little bottom part of the skis. Okay, so the skis are all done. So now I'm gonna switch back to red to do the straps on the skis, but you could do whatever color you want for these. I'm just following along with the original design and matching it. So red for the straps. Now if you're on red, just leave it on red if your hat is red. So match your color now to whatever color your hat is, whatever color you want the decorative outline to be on the hat. So I'm already on red, so I just leave mine on red and stitch that decorative outline. Okay, so after that is the arms. I'm using a medium brown for my little twig arms. So switch to your arm color and then you can stitch out his little twigs. Okay, so after the arms, we're putting on our mint color for the next two steps for the pom-poms on the hat. And then also for the main part of the scarf. Okay, so change color if you want a different color scarf and go ahead and stitch the scarf. Okay, so now I'm switching to this green for the fill and the edging on the scarf. So now, of course, orange for the carrot nose. And we are just about done our snowman. And then black for the eyes, and I'm going to leave the black on for the final stitch too, which gives us our cutting guidelines, so that'll be really visible when I'm trimming it on camera. So now let's do that. Okay, and finally the trimming guidelines, which can be in any color you want. I'm just going to keep the black on and do them in black so that they show up on the video. Okay, so that's our snowman all done, and then here's what he looks like once you take him off the hoop and trim any extra little bits that it leaves. And then we're going to do 3 more of those so that you have 4 of your triangle pieces all together, of course, and then we will move on to the trimming portion. Okay, and now trimming for our big triangles. We're going to use these trimming guidelines, and just extend those all the way to the corners where they meet. So you're not going to cut here on your tack down line. You're going to start by lining up your ruler with that line. I've done in black so you can see it really well. And I'm going to do mine in 2 halves here, 2 sections. Line that up with that black line there. Now I have also done it where I have just followed that tack down line and then extended the tack down line so that it meets down here. Rather than cutting off a straight line there, you want to go and make sure it's a complete triangle and comes to a point. And I have just followed the tack down line and that has worked fine. But in the interest of following the instructions for this video, I'm going to use these tack down lines. And I'm going to use this one to make sure that I'm straight this way. And then line it up as best as I can along this one. And then one more this direction. So I'm going to line up that dotted line with that cut edge. Line up this side with that black line. And there's my cut triangle. So like I said, you just extend those lines all the way out to here until they meet and they make a point there. And then if you're worried about this showing, you can always unpick it if you did it in a visible color other than white. But I'm not going to worry about it because it's going to be sewn right into the seam. It should be hidden, whatever color you did in it should be totally hidden in your seam when you sew it together because it doesn't go all the way to the batting, and I'm going to sew mine probably all the way to the batting, or even a little bit further, the way that I've been doing my cuties. Or if you're worried about it, just unpick it, or you can unpick it after you've sewn everything together. So there's our cutting. So do that for all of your 4 triangles, and then you'll be ready to put your cutie together. Okay, so I'm in my Cuties Volume 2 file, and I'm going to go to quilting because I'm going to do the borders now, and I want the one that is called Diamonds and Sunburst. That's the one. And then I'm going to check the file size on these, so that'll be 1 by 10. I think I'm going to do 2 1 by 10s. Oh no, not for the inner border. For the inner border, I'm just going to do 1 by 14. So my 14 fits in my 8 by 14 hoop. And it won't bore you with all of this, but I can carefully line them up so that I can fit all 4 in one hoop. So I'll do that and then I will get to stitching. Okay, so I'm able to get all 4 of mine in there, and I'm just going to do them all at 14 inches, which I know is more than what I need, and then I'll cut them to size after I sew them on. Okay, so once again, I've got my cutaway mesh stabilizer in. I have the pre-cut stuff, so I do 2 pieces in my big hoop. And then what we're going to do is just simply follow the steps that we do for any other background quilting. So we're going to first do the batting placement stitch. So the way that I'm going to do it, this is just personal preference. I'm going to do all 4 of the batting placement stitches, and then I'll put the strips of scrap batting that I have, or 1 big piece, and then I'll do all 4 of the batting tack down lines. So now I've got my batting tacked down for all 4 of my border strips. I'm going to take my hoop off the machine and trim the batting as close as I can get to that stitch line, and then I will put it back on to do the fabric placement line. Okay, so now it's back on the machine and it's ready for the fabric placement stitch. So I'm going to do all 4 of those, and then I will do all 4. Then I'll place my fabric, the strips that I've already cut, along those placement lines. Then I'll do the fabric tack down line, and then I will switch colors and do the final quilting. Okay, so now I'm just going to lay my strips on over those placement lines. Now I've cut my strips longer on purpose here, so I like to place them, sometimes I'll leave a little bit of an overhang at the top, as I know I'm going to be trimming them down anyway. And then just get those lined up with the placement lines as best I can. So I will do that for all 4 of those. Okay, so I've switched to my medium gray thread for my quilting for these borders, and I'm going to do the last step, the 5th step for each of these, and then my inner borders will be done. Okay, so then I can just simply take my hoop off, and then I'll unhoop my stabilizer and just trim those along the edge of the fabric. Not along the tack down lines. Those are going to be your stitching line when you attach it to your cuties. So just trim along the edge of your fabric. I actually more recently, cuties that I've cut more recently than the January one, I've cut them all around 14 inches, and then all of these have been the same length. And then I just sew them on and cut them as I'm going, rather than cutting 12 and 14. Rather than having 2 shorter and 2 longer, I've just cut them all the same, because I can do it in my big 14-inch hoop like this, and then I'll just trim them down afterwards when I'm attaching them to my cutie. So now our inner borders are ready to go. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the outer borders, and I found that I can fit 3 of the 2-inch borders in my 8x14 hoop side by side, and then I'm going to do 2 hoopings of the 10-inch length for each of my outer borders, which is actually 9.5 inches in length when it is stitched out. And that will give me exactly what I need for my outer borders, which is 17.5 to 18 inches in length, depending on trimming once I get to that outer border step. And then I also have some extra room in my hoop, into which I've placed 2 of my bitty blocks down at the bottom. So I'll show you those at the same time. So let's move over to the hoop and we will stitch out the outer borders. So first, go ahead and stitch out your batting placement line, and I will do that for the 3 pieces of outer border that I'm going to do. So I'll do my batting placement lines all at once and then put my batting. Okay, so I'm going to place my batting for the first one, and then it's a little bit wide, so that I'll just trim it, place the second one and stitch that tack down line, and then do the tack down line for that one. Okay, so now I'm going to take my hoop off my machine, trim the batting around on all the sides close to the stitch line, and then I will put it back on my machine. Okay, so the batting's all trimmed and back on my machine, and now I'm going to stitch the placement line for each of those 3 borders. Now first I will do the placement for a border strip that doesn't have any quilting on it yet. I'm going to show you both types, both when you're putting one on that doesn't have any quilting on it yet and one that already has quilting. So I line the top of mine up pretty close to the top of the batting, maybe a 1/4 inch above it. And then carefully line up the sides with the placement lines as closely as I can. And then I can start stitching once that's lined up as close as I can get it. Okay, now for the next part, I'm going to attach and stitch a piece of border fabric that already has some background quilting done on it. So I'm going to take a little piece of rolled up Kimberbell paper tape and stick that with the sticky side out just above my batting. And then you can see on this piece here, it already has the batting and the quilting on half of it where I did that previously. So I'm going to fold it up and then line it up on the top of the batting and match up the batting so that it's touching but not overlapping. So that's right, so that it's right against the batting that's currently in my hoop. And I'll just line that up as well as I can, and then I will hold the top part of the fabric so it hopefully doesn't shift at all. I'll bring down the bottom half and I'll line that up as best I can with the placement lines. Most of the time it isn't exactly perfect, but I'll just do the best I can, and then I will stitch the tack down line. Okay, now that those 2 are tacked down, I'm going to switch my thread to the light blue color I'm using for the quilting, and I will do the quilting for all 3 strips. Now I'm moving down to do my bitty blocks. So I will just show one on camera from start to finish, and I'll stitch out the rest of the borders and bitty blocks off camera. So of course you start with your batting placement line. Then place your batting and stitch your batting tack down line. And now trim your batting, and then we will stitch the background placement line. Okay, so once you've stitched your background placement line, take your background fabric, in this case it's the green color for the bitty blocks for the January cutie, and I cut mine 3 inches by 3 inches rather than 2.5 by 2.5, so that the background tack down line actually has something to grab onto. So place that and stitch your background tack down line. So for the final step, I'm switching my thread to my medium green color to match the fabric and stitch out those cute little skis. So there's the bitty block all done, so make sure that you have 4 of those in total. Okay, so now we're going to start at the center and work our way out on our January cutie. So we'll take our 4 center pieces. We've got those all trimmed up to 5.5 by 5.5. And you'll notice you can still see this exterior line, because once I lined it up a 1/4 inch from the ends of my decorative stitching on each side, that's still inside my cut, but that's okay because that'll be hidden in the seam. So we'll take 2 of those, turn one of them 90 degrees, and then I'm going to line them up so that the decorative stitching is lined up. So I want to make sure that that end where my decorative stitching ends is right on top of the other end of the decorative stitching on the other square. And of course you can pin it if you want. And then again, the decorative stitching right here for that inner circle I'm gonna do my best to make sure that lines up. Now I love to use this open toe foot because I can really see what I'm doing on my machine, and then I've just got it set to a 1/4 inch stitch setting, which automatically moves it over to the right for me, so it's not right in the middle. And that's just one of the stitches that my machine has. Otherwise, you can set it up however you need to get the 1/4 inch. And then what I like to do is I like to follow this stitch line, my batting tack down line. And I kind of use that more as a 1/4 inch guide on these things, more than I do the edge of my foot. And sometimes I like to go a little bit over that line. I've just found that's given me the best results on the cuties. So then I will do the same thing with the next pair. Rotate one of them and line them up as best I can. I'll take those off my machine and just see how I did. And now if I'm happy with that, with how that lines up, then I can move on. If I wanted to try to make it a little bit more exact, I could, but I think I'm happy with that. Oh, that one's a bit off. I'm gonna redo that one. I'm gonna unpick that line and redo it. I need to move this one up a little bit. It's a little bit too low on both of them. And because both of them are low, I know I can get it better if I redo it. If just one of them was, then I probably wouldn't be able to get it any more precise than that. But let me just try again. Let's see if I can line that up better. I'm gonna try right there. And there. I think that's gonna overlap. So that edge is hanging over a little bit, it looks like. But luckily these are pretty forgiving by the time the final piece, by the time all these pieces finally come together. Since it's only 22 by 22, it actually is pretty forgiving as far as mistakes go. Yeah, I think I'm gonna call that good. So then we're going to take these two pieces and put them together and try to line those up. And I'm going to also try to nest my seams together. I'll have this seam going this way, this seam going this way. Try to nest those seams as well as lining up these circles. And lining up the decorative stitching on the outer as well. It was a little bit tricky. I'm gonna keep checking it as I go. Well, I think I got that one lined up. Now this one, I'm just going to peel it back a little bit, match it up as best I can. Okay, so that's acceptable. Of course, you can take it out and redo it as many times as you'd like, and I'll just cut those extra threads after. Now my quarter circles aren't all exactly the same size, but that one, that bottom one lined up nicely. The side ones are okay. The top ones, it's okay. It'll be you know, perfect is the enemy of good, or even the enemy of great a lot of the time. And I think that's gonna still turn out really, really nice once I have it all done and put together and on my table. So the next thing we're going to do is our inner borders, which are the gray. And I'm going to try to make sure that my seams are still going the same direction as I stitch on the borders. So this seam's going this way. I haven't cut my borders down yet, so you can see I've got lots of extra on either side, which I will leave until I've totally sewn them on. Actually, oh yeah, no, so I did. So I do all of my inner borders the same size because I have the big 14-inch hoop, and then I will just trim them down after. So these ones, these first two are especially long, much longer than they need to be. Okay, so let's sew those on using a 1/4-inch seam. Okay, and I'll cut that off and check. And then what I'll probably do here is I'll just take this out with a seam ripper after, because that didn't quite get hidden in the seam. Okay, so now we're going to turn to the opposite side and do the border on the opposite. So same thing on this side. Now if your quilting doesn't go right to the edge, like how I did it here, I've got about a 1/4 inch without any. That's fine. You could still, if you don't have any extra, or you don't have any extra quilting, that's fine. And if there's some batting in your seam, that's totally fine. It still works out. It still works out just fine. There's just a little bit more bulk in your seam, but it really won't affect the final layout of your table topper, and you won't be able to tell. No one else will be able to tell once it's lying on your table. So if you've got an extra 1/4 inch at the top or bottom or both, that's totally fine. You'll remember that that 1/4 inch is going to be hidden in the next border. And then after that, and if you're on your outer border and you've got that, that's going to be hidden in the next piece. So there's always a 1/4 inch on each side that's going to be hidden in the seam. Now I've got lots of extra, so I don't need to worry about that. But then I do end up with some batting in a couple of my seams, and that's totally fine. That still works out just fine. I don't even worry about it. Now I'm trying to figure out which way I want this to go. I think that way again. Now you can see my sides are not totally straight. My batting maybe wasn't cut quite as close to the stitch line as I would have liked along here. That's going to be fine. There's a little bit of batting in my seam here, and that will be totally fine. Now, a word of caution when you're ironing it. You can iron it as you go, of course, which will just give you more precise seams. What I found is that I can't have my iron very hot, and I've got to iron it on the top side. Otherwise, I found that my iron is melting my mesh cutaway and it's sticking to the iron. So I've got to iron it from the top. So now is a good point to iron. And I always iron so that my seams are towards the border when I'm putting on a border. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it like this, look at it from this view, and trim and trim. So trim these borders. Yeah, I like to look at them like this. I like to fold them in and trim them so that I'm trimming them against this edge. just flip it around and do the same thing on this side. And now when I go to sew on the other two borders, this is pretty much lined up nicely. Gives me a really straight edge for the other borders. Okay, so now grab another border, your longer inner border, if yours are different sizes. And let's see, I'm just lining mine up here. And that should be good. It doesn't look like I have any extra on these guys. So I've got to line it up at the top there. I might have to trim my inner border. It looks like this isn't quite long enough, which is really weird. Either, yeah. Let me see if my other one's long enough. That's weird. I must have trimmed. That one's long enough. Now, okay, what I could do is I could take a little bit that I've trimmed off and I will just add that on. Otherwise I'll have to trim my inner borders all the way around quite a bit smaller, and that'll throw off my quilting. And my quilting will really not be centered anymore. So this piece has the quilting on it. And I will just sew those together. Oh, and one doesn't even have the batting, so that's good. I only have one layer of batting in this tiny seam then. That is excellent. But my machine doesn't really like that. Give me more than enough, which seems silly to do that for just that little tiny piece, but sometimes we just have to do what we have to do. Well, this is real life. It doesn't always come out perfectly. I obviously trimmed one of those too short when I did the quilting. Whoops. And that, oh, something's going on now. I don't know what's going on here. My machine isn't grabbing. Okay, there we go. So I'll have an extra seam there, which you probably won't have because you won't have trimmed yours too short like me. Then once again, I'm just going to, probably not until I'm totally done, because there might be others that I need to do, but at the very, very end, I will go along and just use a seam ripper to unpick that tack down line that's just barely showing. Yeah, that one, even though that one's mostly hidden, I'll probably still take that one out. And then there's a spot there, and then I'll just check anywhere else, and then any other seams I'll check as well, to make sure that I take all of those out. So I'm going to give this a press at the ironing board. Okay, so like I said, I come from the top whenever I do it so that it doesn't melt my light mesh cutaway stabilizer. And then I will just hold that. There's quite a lot of layers here. So I've got it on the highest heat setting. And then I take it the direction that I want my seams to go. Hold that for a few seconds because it's so thick and it's got so many layers that it's got to press down. And I want it to be nice and flat. And then that'll make it easier for me to see the tack down line where I need to pick out stitches at the end as well. And then we're going to move on to attaching our triangles, in this case our snowman triangles. Okay, on to the snowman. Okay, so what I do when I'm getting ready to attach my triangle is I'll line it up how I want it, then flip it to make it right sides together, and then I'll look to see that the point of my triangle is lined up with the line of my center squares. So it's easier to do this flat on the desk, but this will work too. And then once I've got that, I just hold it in place. Of course, you can pin it or clip it. And then put that onto my machine. Now I've got another piece to trim there that I haven't trimmed yet, but I will get to that in a moment. My borders aren't exactly square, that's fine. I've got a little bit of extra there, but like I said, the design is actually quite forgiving. So now we'll flip to the other side. Do the same thing on that side with another snowman block. So I will take that and I will line up the point of the snowman block with the line in the center as near as I can. And line that up with my edge at the top as much as possible. So line that up with the borders as best we can here. Oh, it didn't sew that last little bit, it looks like. Okay, let's take care of that right now. We'll just deal with these issues as they come up as necessary. There's a little bit here that didn't sew. Oh, my thread is not in the needle. So that's not helpful. Try that again. Okay, let's see if that's sewed. That looks better. Make sure I flip that out the way it's supposed to be. Now we can finish our snowman triangle here. Okay, so there's two of our triangles on opposite sides. And then we'll just go to the next one. Okay. Have a look at that one. Okay, that just looks good to me. And then we've got one more triangle to put on. Okay, so now we're going to trim up these sides, trim off these extra pieces so that we can put on the outer border. Okay, so I'm going to line up the bottom edge of my ruler with that bottom edge and then try to line it up as best I can so that it's making 90 degrees here. Get rid of those extra bits. And then line that up again, and then we'll try to line it up with the other corner on the other side. Oh, don't worry if it's not perfectly square. Mine never are, but I'm still so happy with how my table toppers turn out. I think they are just the cutest thing. So we're gonna just do that on all 4 sides. Just try to get it as square as possible. And some blocks are a lot more square than others here. Got a little bit to take off in that corner. And then once we get our borders on, it really will hide anything that's out of square. It'll be really well hidden in the outer borders. Okay, so now we're going to take our shorter pieces of outer border, whatever color you did for the outer border. In this case, I've got this wavy lines, turquoisey blue piece. So take your shorter borders. We're going to put those on first, and then we will attach the bitty blocks to the longer pieces of border, and then attach those to our cutie. So pick a side that you want to start with, and just attach your shorter border to that side. Okay, so there's my first border on. Now just flip it around to the opposite side and take your other short border and do the same thing on that side. Okay, so now the instructions say that you need an 18-inch border for all 4 of your border pieces. Now mine, I just measured this side that's got the border, and then if you're going to measure this side of your cutie, you want to measure from where your triangle tip is to the other triangle tip. So mine is actually only 17.5 because of how I had to trim my triangles to make them square or whatever. So I just need 17.5 for my long ones. So I'm going to cut my 2 long ones to 17.5. Okay, so now if you're like me and you cut your bitty blocks a little bit bigger so that this tack down line had something to grab, you're going to want to trim those to 2.5 by 2.5. Okay, so now that I've got my outer borders and my bitty blocks trimmed, I'm going to decide which way I want my skis to face. I think I'm going to have them pointing into the center of my cutie. Some of them it will matter more than others. Like February's got the words on it, so you'll want to decide which way you want the words to be facing. I like to do these all in a line, in a chain piecing way. It's just my preference. You'll know if you're a quilter, you'll know about chain piecing. Okay, so now I'm gonna flip that over. Well, when I do this side, I'm gonna want the skis to be facing this way. So I'm going to have them this way. I'll snip that off. So I'm picturing it along the bottom of my cutie. So that's got the skis facing towards the center. Then on this side, I want them facing towards the center. So I'll do them like that. So close to done already. Okay, cut that off. And then we're going to start sewing them on. Of course, you can press the outer borders at this point and press your cutie if you want to, if you haven't, for a couple of steps. And then this is how I want it on my cutie. So we're going to have it like this. And then I'm going to try to line up, to nestle my seams so that I can have a really nice corner. It doesn't always work, but it's worth trying. Okay, let's see here. Get those seams nestled nicely in there. Oh, this is already looking like it's not going to be very straight, but I'm going to forge ahead and see what it looks like. Okay, so here's my third border, and I'm happy with that. I'm happy with those corners. Let's flip it around and do our final border. Okay, so other than a few strings here and there that I want to cut off, and then some of those tack down lines that are showing on my inner border that I want to get rid of, that's the top of my cutie totally done. So there's my cutie. And then I will do a separate video to show what I do to attach the back. I usually do another layer of batting so that I can cover up all these big thick seams. And then I will put and then line it up with the back, and then I'll spray it with 505 spray. Those three pieces, the batting, this piece, and the backing. And then I will usually stitch in the ditch along my outer borders, and then somewhere along my inner borders, and then my other January one that I did, I stitch in the ditch along these points on the lazy daisy. And then trimmed it and put on the binding. So that's super simple. So I love these. I can't wait for the next volume to come out, volume 2, July to December. And I'm really excited to keep doing these cuties with you. I have February on the way. I have the March video almost done. And then I will start on the April video. thanks so much for watching, and please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I read all of my comments, so if you have any questions or concerns or comments, good or bad, or you think I missed something, please write them down below and I will do my best to improve for the next video. And yeah, I'm just so excited to be able to share these Kimberbell Cuties with you. I know lots of people had trouble with the cuties, so I thought I better make a video so that I can show you that they're actually not too intimidating and not too hard. Thanks again.